Hello and welcome to Mystic Visions with DrShiny. This is a monthly reading for the month of June for Capricorns. Full disclosure, I had this whole reading done, and then when I got to the end, I looked at the video and there was a problem with my computer and it was basically unwatchable. So normally I like to read these, as I pull them, but in this case, I have already completed this reading and I'm trying to kind of recall exactly what I said before. And, perhaps there was something that wasn't said correctly and the universe didn't want me to give you that original reading. I really liked it, but anyway. So here we go again with Capricorn. So what we had for your situation is the Hanged Man. This is an indication that you're kind of in a position where you're probably feeling like you want to put more effort into a situation to get the ball rolling or get something done, but it's not really possible for you to speed this along. So there's a necessity for you to kind of sit back and enjoy the ride and watch other people fulfill their obligations, watch sort of natural cycles occur, or just let the situation play out in its own way. And so there might be a little bit of frustration here, but there's also a tremendous opportunity for growth and enlightenment where you develop your faith, you develop your knowledge that the situation will unfold of its own volition without you having to do much about it, right? Okay, so what's crossing you or influencing you is the Wheel of Fortune, which is in the reverse. And so this kind of plays into that Hanged Man. It explains a little bit of that situation because this is a resistance to the sort of natural ebb and flow and cycles that exist in the universe. It's kind of to say uh, that you may be trying to skip ahead a little bit too much or speed a process along that just has to kind of unfold on its own. I think about, I'm trying to grow trees and I would like to have a nursery. I think that'd be a good way for me to spend my time. And I get frustrated sometimes because, when you're starting out a nursery, it's like you have to plan ahead, many years in advance because it takes the trees that long to grow, right? And by the time you're ready to sell them, you've already been growing for, 2 or 3 years at least. So you have to think way far ahead if you want to have a successful business in something like that. But it also involves a lot of patience about doing what's required, but also allowing the natural flow of time to do its job instead of trying to kind of jump in the way. Okay, so what you're leaving behind is the King of Cups in the reverse. So this is somebody who's being a little emotionally manipulative. So the King of Cups is typically really good at utilizing his emotions for a purpose or organizing people with his emotions. I think of like a therapist or a guru, a spiritual leader of some type. That's somebody who's utilizing their ability to tap into their emotions and their empathy to interact with other people, right? But in the reverse, there's a little bit of abuse of those abilities. So it can be somebody who is a little bit narcissistic or lacks empathy and kind of manipulates others, preys on their emotions, that type of thing. So this is either some person or situation that you're leaving behind, or this is something that you are kind of no longer engaging in that you may have done in the past. You may be starting to recognize the harm that's done, not only to others, but to yourself when engaging in this kind of actions. So you're leaving that behind, and that's a good thing. All right. So what you're moving toward, you have this Three of Swords. Now, this guy is, what you're moving toward, what's in the future. I always like to say, I don't determine your future. You determine your future, right? I can tell you where you're headed. I can tell you the direction or the path that you're on, but I can't tell you for sure that you have to walk that path. So you have the opportunity when you look at the sort of roadmap that I'm laying out for you to choose a different direction. You always have that ability. So I don't want you to ever feel like if I read your future and it's something that you don't like, that you don't have a choice. Okay. So this Three of Swords, and the reason I say that is because Three of Swords typically represents a sort of a heartbreak or um, some regret over bygone feelings or choices that were made. But it has a little bit of a deeper meaning that I like to tap into. Heartbreak, it can just be a simple heartbreak like a breakup or losing somebody that you care about or something. But I like to think of it a little bit differently. It's kind of like anytime you make a decision or you make a choice, there is always well, let's put it like this. If you've ever heard of the myth of, Aladdin and the genie, the magic lamp, the genie gives you, three wishes. And I like to think of the three swords kind of like those three wishes, right? But in all the different variations of that story, it almost always goes the same way, where by the end of it, the person who rubs the lamp basically just wishes for everything to go back to the way it was before. And the reason for that is because the wish represents a sort of conscious thought. And you have three of them here in the Three of Swords. So you think three wishes, three thoughts. But the problem is, whenever you're trying to think about what it is that you want, your mind is not really capable of keeping track of too many variables all at once. So you can think about like one thing that you would change, but it's hard for you to keep in mind all of the other factors that go along with that change. So it's like everything in the universe depends on everything else. You wouldn't be you if I wasn't me, and I wouldn't be me if you weren't you, right? So everything is sort of depends on this interrelated network of energy. And so when you change one thing, you affect everything else. And a lot of people don't take time to stop and realize that. And so you can end up, when pursuing something that you care very deeply about, um, it's almost like the harder you try to seek after something, the more you are blinding yourself to all of the other interrelated aspects of the situation that come with it, right? So it's better for you to maintain a sort of distance and to sort of allow things to unfold. And even if you're active in that quest, maintaining the mindset of allowing things to unfold helps you to take more caution and to have more consideration for all of the different factors that are at play, right? And so that's about what we got for your future. Is you're headed toward being a little bit too voracious when you're searching after your goals or when you're trying to achieve things, and it's going to cause you to essentially not take certain factors into account. So you have to be careful not to fall into like workaholic mentalities or things like that, where you may be working toward a better life, but you may kind of let life pass you by in the meantime, because you're so focused on that end goal, right? Okay, so moving on to your foundation. The foundation kind of represents what is the universe trying to teach you through the situation. What is the sort of imbalance in your life that you are being asked to look at and correct? And what we have for that is this Six of Swords in the reverse. Now, in the Six of Swords, particularly in the reverse here, there's some natural transitions that you're resisting going through. There's some kind of growing pains that you don't really want to experience. You know it's time for a transition, but you're just trying to put it off or deny it or something like that. But deep down, you know that some of these changes need to occur. And so, what this is, the way this relates into your situation and the way it frames this whole thing is, you're being put through this situation where you can't really control things or where things can't go exactly the way you need them to. specifically to get you to grow in this area, specifically to get you to find a way to rely on others if you find yourself unable to, or unable to trust that the situation is going to work out fine. This situation is what you're being put through to give you an opportunity to rise above those prior limitations and to find a new strength, right? And there's a distinct possibility that at some point you really wanted this. You really wanted to have the additional patience or the additional stoicism necessary to get through some of these tough situations. But when you ask for those things, what the universe gives you is an opportunity to achieve it yourself. Because if you were just zapped with, more patience, then it you didn't achieve that. You didn't earn that additional patience. But if you somehow manage to find a way to sort of rise above yourself, then you start to understand what growth is about. Because that's what a plant does, right? That's what a tree does. It constantly grows above itself. And it's kind of weird to think about that way, but that's what you do as a human too, but more in a in a mental sense as well, in addition to a physical growth. Okay, so what we have in your conscious mind, or your crowning thoughts, is this Chariot in the reverse. All right, so you're feeling a little bit like you lack accomplishment, like there are some things left to do, or that you may feel like you're really early in your journey. And that can have a way of making you forsake the smaller details too. If you feel like you're just started out, you feel like you're younger, you can say, well, I got plenty of time ahead of me to do all these other things. And this is where, cue motivational speaker who tells you, tomorrow you could get in an accident and not be here anymore, so don't take any time for granted. Don't feel like you can put things off just because you haven't accomplished a lot of things and you need to catch up or anything like that. Don't worry about that. There's no definitive end goal in life. There's no gateway to get through. There's no finish line, right? And don't try to judge accomplishments objectively. What's important is, are you doing good for you? Are you doing better than you were yesterday, right? None of us can help where we started, but everybody can help if we're trying to grow, if we're putting effort into growing. And so you have to kind of adjust your perception. Otherwise, you're priming yourself to, if you're judging yourself by others' accomplishments and things like that, you're priming yourself to constantly be disappointed and to lack confidence. And when you do that, it's not helping you, it's not motivating you, it's damaging your self-image, it's damaging the factors that motivate you, the very circuitry in your brain that motivates you to do well. You're working against that if you're constantly putting yourself down because you're not matching your expectations or what you perceive as expectations for others. Okay, so your advice for the situation is the Eight of Coins. Okay, so this at first seems a little contrary to what your core message was, which is kind of like take a step back, and don't so voraciously seek after what you want. So on the contrary, this typically represents working very diligently, being very involved in the work, right? But there's a subtle distinction here. The Eight of Coins are the physical realm, not the mental realm, which is swords, right? And so this, even though it's diligent work, very sometimes repetitive, sometimes tedious, it is not work that is that you're thinking about or that you're obsessive over. It's work that you do diligently, and sometimes without really even thinking about it, right? So you kind of feel almost like an autopilot. But however, it's not really like you're completely ignoring what you're doing. You are focused on what you're doing, but you're not grasping, you're not rushing, you're just taking it one step at a time, right? So that's the difference. If you're rushing through something, then you're not really being with the activity. you're trying to skip through it. You're trying to get it over with. You're trying to get it done. And if you're trying to get it done, you're not being with it. You're not being in the present moment. You're not enjoying it, right? So there's a way that you can live your life where the most tedious, mundane tasks can fill the entirety of your attention. Not the thing that comes next, but the thing that you're doing right here, right now. There's a saying that spirituality, true spirituality, is not thinking about God while peeling potatoes, but it's just peeling the potatoes, right? So that's the idea here, is um, to not necessarily stop working at what you're doing. On the contrary, keep working at what you're doing, but be there focused on the present moment and don't have your mind elsewhere to the next accomplishment, the next goal, always thinking about the next thing. Find a way to break big long-term goals up into smaller pieces that you can give yourself a mental reward for accomplishing. And that's how you build your self-confidence and your dopamine levels over the long run, which will dramatically improve your ability to accomplish goals in general. Okay, so your environment card, you have the Five of Swords here. And the Five of Swords, environment is not strictly speaking you, but it is either somebody around you, your household, maybe your workplace. It could be your neighborhood, or even just like the society in general around you. So this is, your environment. The idea is when you look out around you, what do you see? And what you're seeing is some conflict. You're seeing some people have some different ideas about what's right, and they're willing to fight over these to the point where they will sometimes be hurtful and say things that they didn't mean. And that type of conflict is easy to get caught up in, and it's also easy for you to feel like you can make the situation transcend the conflict to solve the conflict, right? And I'm very guilty of this, where you feel like you can solve all the world's problems by coming up with some realization or working really hard or something like that. But in the end, people have their own battles, and it's part of the natural cycle of life that we saw in the wheel. People have their own conflicts and their own battles and their own personal growth and development to go through. And sometimes that takes the form of conflict. So sometimes it's best for you to just allow it to be what it is and stay out of it to the greatest extent possible, and let things kind of flourish on their own. Okay, so your fears card is the Ace of Cups in the reverse. So you're a little bit closed off to unfamiliar energies. And so it's not necessarily even that, it could be bad things. You don't want to feel bad things. You don't want to feel loss, pain, regret, those types of things. But this is not always just indicative of bad things. Sometimes you can be closed off to positive emotions simply because they're new or unfamiliar to you. If you're conditioned in such a way that you feel negative about yourself for a long time, you will grow comfortable with that. And so, why would that happen? Well, in the society that we live in, productivity is a virtue almost. So the way that kind of plays out, if you're not working really diligently, if you're not having victories all the time or accomplishing goals, you don't have a neutral view of yourself. You have a negative view of yourself. Whereas a negative view you would think would be somebody who's doing bad things. You don't have a neutral view of yourself if you're not really doing anything. You have a negative view of yourself. Okay. So, and that comes from our value of productivity, of not being lazy, work ethic, and that kind of thing. But the unfortunate side effect to that is we've set ourselves up to be very difficult to please to ourselves. We innately believe if we're not working harder than we want to, that we're being lazy or that we don't deserve happiness and good things. And as that idea or concept ruminates over and over in your mind and echoes, it starts to become bigger, and it gets to the point where a lot of people are literally incapable of enjoying life, simply because they've conditioned themselves to think they never deserve it. There's always more work to be done. There's always something else that needs to be done, and that kind of thing. So you have to be careful with this and your fears, because the Ace of Cups is one of the most beautiful and emotionally moving cards in the deck. But being resistant to this could mean that you're caught in some predefined patterns that you have to break free from. Right. Okay, so long-term outcome, or also just your overall message in the reading, is the Two of Wands, in the reverse as well. So, the Two of Wands, this is like being a little bit resistant to planning. So it seems as though the message has kind of been heard. You understand that, or you're beginning to understand that you have to kind of back off a little bit and take things as they come, and not try to specifically strive after a particular path or something like that, because that can really set you up for um, disappointment, and it can also hurt your self-confidence because you're not giving yourself these short-term goals to crush that you can say, yes, I did it. You're not giving yourself that dopamine, and that'll cause over time an imbalance, and you'll become depressed and things like that. So long-term outcome is you're going to figure out how to avoid planning a little bit. And that's not to say that planning is universally a bad thing. Nothing is universally a bad thing, but what you're looking for is a balance. So if you're trying to plan too much, or if you're too dead set on things going a particular way, that's when you can end up hurting yourself. All right. An example of this, my wife recently had a baby, and I have a new daughter. And when we were discussing with some of the nurses and some of her friends who had had babies before, everybody goes into it with a birth plan, a way that they would like the birth to go. But some people are dead set on doing it a particular way. They say, I'm not going to have an epidural. I'm going to do a natural birth. No exceptions. This is the only way I will do this. And then, in the medical world, sometimes things happen, emergencies, unforeseen circumstances, and you're forced to do it a different way than you had planned. And that can cause an extreme emotional distress, which really doesn't help the process of giving birth to a child, right? So ideally, you have a plan, you go into it with a plan, but you're not clinging to that plan so tightly that if things go a different way, it becomes damaging to you, right? You want to have the flexibility and the freedom to kind of roll with the punches, Another way of looking at it, when people get in car accidents, a drunk driver in a car accident, the drunk driver is usually okay, and the people who are alert and paying attention are the ones that end up hurt. And that's because the drunk driver doesn't really see it coming, so he doesn't tense up. He stays loose, he stays floppy, right? Whereas the people who tense up, you've made your body rigid. And so when your body's rigid, it doesn't bend, it doesn't flop, it breaks, and more damage is done to you. So allowing yourself to stay a little loose and to go with the flow, it has a protective feature to it, both in a physical, literal sense and in terms of your mentality. So that's kind of the overall medicine that you're getting through the situation, and I hope that you can see that. I hope I've explained it well, and that about does it for the reading today. So please let me know what you thought about it. Leave me some comments or questions if you have them, and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next month for your next reading.